Hey everybody, welcome back to AI Unleashed. Today I have the pleasure of talking to somebody who is maybe in the AI space, maybe not, we'll find out, but is a multi-award winning uh, designer of experiences, and those experiences impact the entirety of the employee lifecycle from talent through to learning. Over the last year, I've been seeing her everywhere, looking at her work and making sure that I'm following the best of what the market has to offer. And of course, she's here today, Megan Yawor. Thank you very much for being here today.
I really appreciate you having me. Thank you so much. My name is Megan, and my career journey has been a bit of a unexpected one. I started in film, and I have now ended up in aware of many hats, as previously mentioned, looking at experience and talent and building this kind of creative, cohesive journey along the way. And of course, that's touching in with learning and development. And I was previously in that space, so I can never really let that go. And yeah, it's been a whirlwind, and always in the people space, and very much driven by designing experiences, even when I was back in TV, because it was about creating things that elicited emotion and feeling. And I've just carried that through my work. And so I don't know what's next, but I'm excited for the ride so far and where we're going.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's an exciting space to be in. And I think one of the reasons that drew me towards you as a guest for this podcast was that I do get a lot of requests around the concepts of design, the concepts of gamification, how AI is changing these things. And in the gamification space, one of the things I nearly always say is we shouldn't neglect narrative structure and storytelling as a way to elicit either engagement or emotion. And with your background, that comes from a field where actually narrative structure and storytelling is way more important than things like points and e-learning scores and things like that. It becomes a very interesting and fruitful topic for discussion. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try and draw out some of your expertise in this space. So let's start the ball rolling by talking broadly about design in educational programs. So we have corporates that are talking endlessly about design. My perspective that I released today at the time of recording it's today on this was that we have either tool-driven design, stakeholder-driven design, or potentially pedagogic design. And these things are nearly always in conflict in any organization because you have internal pressures and you have internal stakeholders and you have budgets, and all of these things need to balance out into whatever you deliver. But then we have the tricky business about AI and the accelerating capability of producing fairly high impact visuals and cinematic visuals from, we had VO3 making the news last month, I think, or the month before. The ability to produce things that are visually stimulating, visually stunning, the ability to produce stories, all of these things are out there in the market. And therefore we have transformation. So I guess the key question to start this discussion is how is AI changing the design of educational experiences, educational programs, educational materials, and really how do designers cope with this change?
So I'm actually going to reference the article you mentioned. So I think previously being in the digital space, the first thing I would always say when meeting with a stakeholder was, you can't just use tech for tech's sake. It needs to have a reason, it needs to be relevant, it needs to actually be doing something and making things better, not just to be like, look at this. And so I think AI is the same. Right now, all we're hearing is amazing things about it. Look at this new tool. Every vendor you're looking at has highlights around their AI functionality, which is great. But I think you do need to pause and reflect to make sure that, why are we actually doing this? What is it that we're trying to achieve? The age-old question. And will this functionality get us there? I think how I think about AI in the design space is from an instructional design perspective and from a content design perspective, because you can get support in both. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of tools out there that are generating design, videos, modules very quickly, and that's all created for you. So I think there is a time and a place, and I don't want to knock the impact and the benefit of AI. I think if you're a very small team, if you don't have the digital functionality, then it can be a really an amazing support system. If you have a small team and you can use that to generate quick videos and spend your time on the more experiential elements and the creative elements. So I do think there is a place for it. However, you need that instructional design mindset, and that isn't AI generating lesson plans for you or learning objectives. And it can help with that. It's a tool, it can streamline, but you still need to have that basic understanding because you need to use it as a way to support and elevate your work, not create it for you. Because at the end of the day, you know your business, you know the needs of your people, you know what will land somewhere won't land somewhere else. And so you can't just use AI to ask, a blanket statement of, oh, create me a lesson plan for, difficult conversations, and then do that. Additionally, you need the skills to be able to put it in action, and you need to think about it differently. The way we learn is changing. And so yes, it could generate a lesson plan. Yes, it could generate you some prompts for discussion. But is that really where learning is even moving to? I don't think it is. I think we need to reshape how we're thinking about learning in general. And so AI only knows what has been. We need to change that. And I think using it as a tool to make things faster, to challenge us, to be a thought partner is a great way to do that. But we can't rely on it alone.
I'm going to challenge 3 things that you said there. So the first thing is instructional design. Generally, my feeling towards instructional design is that we have already assumed that the educational paradigm is instructional if we use the term instructional design, and it might not be. So I think that term needs to be basically discarded into the depths of hell from whence it came, or whatever. Thinking about design is absolutely fine, but the moment we tag on that word instructional, we make an assumption about the educational paradigm. The second part of this is, you mentioned learning, and is learning changing? And I think we need to be distinct about the difference between learning as a human innate condition, something that we all do from childbirth all the way through to death, that we constantly learn, we constantly take stimulus from the environment, we constantly change what we do and adapt our practices. That's very different to corporate learning. Corporate learning is a mixture of a training function and maybe some other things, depending on the organization. I'll stop there. Let's answer those 2 things first.
So I'm gonna jump on the second one, because I completely agree that corporate learning is not where the reality of learning can happen. And I think that's where I mean to mix things up. So we need more learning in the flow of work. We need to talk to our people to understand where is it that they're learning. I've been seeing a lot of articles around LMSs aren't going to be there anymore because you have chatbots and things that you can ask questions about and either, spit out your own content or get the answers you need, or customized, chatbots. And so I think 100% that we are not where learning is going. And it's how do we adapt that? Because at the end of the day, it's the behavior change that we want. So how do we create that, environment? And is it doing more, as flipped classroom? Is it doing more cohort based where they're working on a portfolio over a 6-month period, and at the end they're actually solving real business problems? What actionable takeaways are we giving them? I think that's 100% true. I think this idea of going into a classroom for half a day and getting talked at and having breakout discussion groups needs to evolve if we really want to drive change. And I think using different tools, we can do that. And I think there needs to be more of a blend. And this is my love of digital, needs to be more blended with the face-to-face, because I don't think it's one or the other. I think blended is the future and learning in the flow. And I think we need to move away from, we went to a training, it was great, and we never talked about it again. Again, it needs to be this ongoing learning, because as you said, it's something that happens all the time. So how do we, as a corporate environment, facilitate that and make sure that we have the right things in place to do that? And I think AI can help get us there, but it's not the only thing. There's cultural things that need to change. There's leadership accountability. There's AI. There's the tools. There's the content to support that. It's also the understanding the needs of the people to make sure that it's relevant to them. It's what they need and where they need it, because it really is about the right learning at the right time. And then the instructional designer piece, yes, it assumes that we are instructing and not designing. Although I still like the idea of that the intention is there to be designing. Although I don't like maybe necessarily the word instructor, but I think it's about facilitating learning. And so you're creating a design that facilitates that, whether with an individual who's leading or allowing the individual to do that, or if it's cohort learning or social learning. So I think it's more about facilitating design. But you are, at the end of the day, designing an experience around design. I apologize for the lights, which is getting our people where it is that they want to go, but it has to be designed for them. And it has to be done thoughtfully, because again, you can't just put it in a chatbot to say, even with the best prompts. But I think the people side of it comes in, because if it is a classroom, for example, you need to be able to pivot in the flow. You need to be able to, if people are veering off, you need to bring them back. Or if there's an area you're seeing a really big gap, how do you address that in the moment? And so you have to kind of be flexible with the lesson plan, especially with where I think, face-to-face sessions could go. You need to be more of a guide and a coach versus an instructor.
Yes. So I said 3 things, but I only mentioned 2. The third one is the depth or the magnitude of assumption around static versus dynamic content. So if we move into a future where we have dynamic content. We mentioned chatbots. We could have multimodal generation at the point in time of need. I need to know this thing. I need to see a working schematic of this particular machinery. Generate that for me based on the documents that you have. We have a wide variety of things. And we move towards the idea of information in the flow of work rather than learning in the flow of work. People are going to learn anyway, regardless of the existence of a learning department. They're going to be solving problems at their work. They're going to be figuring out the things that they need to do, and they're going to be getting better and more experienced at what they do. The existence of a learning department, to me, does not affect any of that stuff. It doesn't measure that stuff, it doesn't track that stuff, and it doesn't really have a hand in that. Creation of static content from a department tends to be more focused around specific initiatives or campaigns. Whether those are compliance related or development related, it's still a campaign. When we do that, we make an assumption that we're going to make static content. People are going to go to a time and space event. People are going to go to a digital repository, a management system, whatever we're going to call it, and they're going to access that static content. And over time, we're going to need to update that content. That paradigm itself is related to something else that you said, and that is people are changing how they learn. People want on-the-fly information. Are people changing how they learn? I don't think so. Cognition is cognition. It always has been and always will be. But how people access information, their attention spans, and all of these kinds of things, their ability to search, those things are changing. So we have a little bit of a perfect storm there, that people want the thing that they want when they want it, as soon as they can, and we have the ability to deliver that. Unless we deliberately take a view that we're going to spend money to get in the way of that. We're going to create a department that stops that flow from happening. We're going to create a department that says, I'm going to take 16 weeks to make whatever it is the learning experience is. I'm going to take my time and I'm going to spend a long time writing things, design documents and thinking about pedagogies and probably not looking at the literature, which, if you're watching this and you're a learning department, go and look at the literature that relates to the thing that you do. Come on, work with me here, right? So we have a wealth of literature in the educational space. We have a change in people's behaviors about how they relate to information, how they gather information, and how they problem solve. And then we have the existence of this department in the middle, somehow, somewhere, getting in the way of all of this stuff. I know that's a little bit of a contrarian view, but for the purposes of discussion, why not? Let's go there, right? So the assumption is static content is the way to go because it needs purposeful design. And the counterpoint to that is it doesn't, because the machine will give you what you want in the manner in which you ask for it. It's quicker. It's probably more relevant based on documents. It doesn't have some of the fancy things we might do in the design space, but does it need to have those things? What do you think?
So I would challenge that back. I don't think
Please do.
the L&D team, is getting in the way of that. I think it needs to evolve, but I think it's necessary. And so I think, yes, there are certain things that you could quickly want and need. So, if it's, I need to do a quick pitch, how do I do this? What are the best way to engage somebody? Bam, there it is. Yes, maybe you don't need to go to a 2-hour face-to-face session to learn that. And that is something you would need in that moment. You want to call it up quickly. You want a quick reference guide, something like that. I get that. However, there's so many bigger behavioral things that are not necessarily relevant to your immediate job. I could research, how do I be a good manager? And it could give me 10 tips. And I could say, okay, well, I'm a great manager now because I know these 10 tips. But what does that look like in practice? If a tip is be empathetic, and I'm like, how are you today? That's me being empathetic. No, that's not me being empathetic. And so I think while yes, L&D roles do need to evolve and change to the need, and maybe more role-specific content and focusing on those areas isn't where the time needs to be spent. But I think there are bigger programs and things that, while yes, will evolve over time, are constant. So manager training, leadership training, the best practice there, onboarding experiences, setting people up for success, compliance. How do we make that more engaging? I've talked to many places about compliance, but I think there are...
Why would we make that more engaging?
Because people have to do it, and I can't help
them. So they have to do it. Just make them do it. What's the need for any money to be spent on that stuff? Give them a PDF and be done with it.
Behavior change, though. If you're trying to get them to stop, if you have high risk and your company is letting in all these phishing emails, a piece of paper is not going to stop that. You need to give them practice and application opportunities. So L&D provides the safe space to apply and practice, because I can sit here behind a computer And even with ChatGPT, because I've used this, I've done scenario-based things. Give me a scenario, I'll respond how I'll take it, and it'll give me feedback. Great. But that's me alone with my computer. That's not a person who has years of experience that has an actual human lens to it. No offense to ChatGPT, but is saying actually that wouldn't land because of this. Also, they know your business. So it's not just the human touch of it, it's the human touch with the lens of your organization and the reality of it. Again, I've been at places where it's very playful, and your approach with how you interact with people would be very different. Managers are doing different challenges that are on TikTok to engage their teams, and I've been at other places where that wouldn't land. And so you need that lens. And so I think you can only go so far with learning online and using AI. You still need the team there. Does their role need to change? Yes. Does their area of focus need to change? But I think that's where things like I mentioned before, where they become more of a coach and a guide, because at the end of the day, there are areas of learning and development that we all need, that we need that from. That's why coaches are, a successful industry, because it's that human touch, that personalization, that no matter how good your prompts are, is never going to, really get you what you need.
I don't have much respect for the coaching industry, but I'll talk about that in a second. But some of the other things you mentioned, so around the compliance piece, for example, the need for compliance is risk mitigation for a business. And the reason I say you don't need to even think about making it engaging is you are going to make people do it anyway. And if you have the choice with your budgets to decide, I'm going to make this thing very engaging and I'm going to make people do it and I'll get the check mark and I can demonstrate that to an auditor or a regulator, versus I'm going to spend no money on this thing and make people do it and I can demonstrate the check mark to an auditor or a regulator, it doesn't seem to make business sense. So that's point one. Point two is, you mentioned phishing, right? We already have phishing campaigns run by IT where you have messages in your inbox, you can get feedback mechanisms from that. And the way I've seen this implemented in nearly every company where I've seen it is you have effectively simulation-based learning run by your IT department, nothing to do with the learning department at all. And then the learning department's intervention will be everybody, regardless of whether you've successfully flagged every phishing attempt or not. There's no metrics that are shared between these departments. Regardless of how you did, regardless of whether you got everything right, you're still going to have to sit through this boring half-an-hour e-learning where you've got to click around a screen. It's not a good use of money. It's not a good use of time. It's not a good use of resources, anybody's resources. So how does that move towards behavioral change? Because you mentioned behavioral change, and I have not seen this anywhere, that we have a compliance need. The compliance need is for a company to demonstrate something to a regulator, and now we go and talk about behaviors. I get your point about things like onboarding and a base level of capability for managers and behavioral interactions between people, and all of these things are, yes, we need to make these things accurate, we need to make these things engaging, and there's a valuable use for design there. On the compliance side, I just don't see it.
My last two companies have launched compliance portfolios, brand new, and I have seen behavior changes at both of them because I actually did work with the relevant teams. So I was working with the health and safety teams to get months and months of data, years of data, to see where were we at, where were our gaps, how many slips, trips, and falls are we having, how many health and safety risks are we raising. I was working with the risk team, how many, conflicts of interest, receipts were received, how many people failed phishing, how many people, and at what level did they click, did they enter information? And then I tracked all of that for 6 months to a year. And then after we launched the campaigns for both companies, I tracked the same behaviors, and I saw, not everywhere, but we were able to see changes across multiple areas and a significant increase. And then we've also changed the culture around engagement with compliance, with ongoing sustained completion rates from our new hires. So actually, I would 100% argue that about behavior change, because I've seen it at two different organizations in completely different industries across a variety of compliance modules. I have a lot of feelings around compliance.
So I'm not going to buy the thing about completion rates, because that's nothing to do with behaviors, but what kinds of behaviors were you able to measure, and how did you measure them?
I'm going to have to recall this. So for health and safety, at first we saw a spike in reports, because that was one of the things we had identified, that we weren't seeing a spike in reports. So we saw a spike in reports, and then in the incidences that were having the highest level of reports, we saw a reduction of incidences. And then in other instances, we saw the number of, I believe, people clicking into phishing emails decreased, as well as entering the information after they clicked, if they were to click. We saw, as I mentioned, the conflicts of interest. So, you're supposed to raise when there's a conflict of interest. So we saw an increase in that. On the different avenues of raising incidences, we saw an increase in people reaching out across all of those. Same thing with an increase in data flags for potential breaches. And data protection, that was in both companies. Cannot remember off my top of my head any other ones, but I do have it all mapped out because I was tracking. I come into an organization, I want my baselines.
That's good stuff. If you're watching this, people, this is how we relate KPIs, metrics, measurable things to behaviors. This is why Megan's an award winner, right?
And I love data.
Love it.
Good stuff.
Yeah, and you gotta love data, right? And I think you've given a lot of good examples there, which are relevant to probably a lot of learning departments out there, which is nice. On the safety side, safety departments tend to do this stuff quite well, generally speaking, because they have, when was the Health and Safety at Work Act? Early 70s, something like that. They've got best part of 50, 60 years of coping with this kind of stuff to get this right. And safety regulations tend to be written in the blood of people that went before, right? So there are consequences to this kind of thing, which is nice. But safety, security, cybersecurity is not the entirety of compliance.
No, and I think though, to that point of also, because yes, at face value, a lot of, and this isn't just with compliance, there's a lot of things that are more of, I just need to prove that you looked at this. I just need to check the box.
Yep.
I think it's changing the narrative when you're speaking to stakeholders and presenting things around true, but longer term, what is the negative impact if we just care about checking the box? And so that was a lot of conversations when I've come in. I said, do you want completions or do you want long-term change? Because if you want completions, to your point, I'll give them a document. We'll have the highest completion rate ever. But I think if you can kind of tell that, this is where the storytelling comes into the bigger picture, longer term impact, but longer term risk. So even the story, I think, around compliance is not just pushing out the learning. And this is the case, again, tying in the experiences. It's the experience around the content you're creating. And I think this leans into the AI versus the people side. That's the people telling that story. It's championing it, going out, connecting the dots, mapping it out. And it's the story you weave into the actual learning, into the comms. It got to a place where people would see me and be like, oh, I swear I did it. Not that I want to be known for that, but I think you create so much of an experience where it's a tangible thing. And that's people that does that, not technology.
So you've given me a lot to think about there. I think there are aspects to compliance which we haven't gone into, but I have worked in many regulated industries and nearly all of them have, we need to show somebody this procedure and we need to demonstrate that it's been ticked off. We need to report to regulators on how many people have signed that they will follow this PDF. That's the side of life of compliance. It's a risk mitigation measure. I'm not going to die on this hill, but I probably will at some point. I still don't see a need for spending money on that kind of thing. But that's regulated industries, right? They all do it, and they all somehow... And I'm not saying that that's not a valuable thing. It's a valuable thing to a business. What I'm saying is, don't call that learning, because it's not. Challenge me. Come on, do it. Do it.
I love that this has turned into compliance because it's behavior change and you're helping people understand. Because to me, learning is not just, you don't know how to do this, here's how to do it. It's understanding it. It's the context around it. It's the longer term impact. It's the what's in it for me. It's all of that woven together. And so compliance, it's, yes, you're doing something wrong, potentially. You need to do it right. This is what right looks like and how to do that. But it's also how to keep an eye out for others, how to raise it, how to flag it, how to, and understand why. It's not just, and what the impact is on you, on your team, on the business, on your clients. And so it's the story again. And that's what I think drives it. And that to me is, stories are such a huge part of learning. And so I think this isn't just compliance. Well, yes, it's bare bones this is the wrong thing to do. Don't do it. Here's how to do it right. To me, there's so much around it. And that's what makes it land.
On this point, because I'm agreeing with a lot of what you're saying, but I'm trying to disagree for the sake of discussion, right? So I'm going to give you an example, because you said that the roles of designers might need to change in the future. And that's something I do agree with, that not only the roles, but the skills and the technologies and the workflows, all of this stuff will probably need to change. If we were to think about the article that I wrote, was that there are 3 areas to design that are in conflict. And one of those areas is tool-based design. So I bought a license for Avatar tool, Synthesia, Colossian, R1H, HN, something, one of those. And therefore, everything that I produce in my department must have an avatar video behind it, right? That's tool-led design, and not massively valuable, but it's a thing. We know it's a thing. The second one is stakeholder-driven design. then that is noisy stakeholder over here who will go to my boss if I don't deliver exactly what they want, has given me a PowerPoint that was shoddily written with a couple of diagrams, and they say, word for word, you have to tell this thing to those people. That exists in the industry. Third thing is everything you've described. Pedagogy-driven design, thinking about experiences and all these things. How does a learning designer who is in one of the tricky situations around number two, the stakeholder-driven thing, how do they start to approach this conversation so they can start to measure baselines, start to understand data, start to craft an experience, start to use narrative structure and storytelling to move people into a situation where they understand the implications of doing or not doing something? How does that conversation start? I don't know how many different places you've worked in that have leeway to do these things, but I have worked in places where there was very much the stance of just go and do this thing. Don't even question it. Write this down. You've been sent it by email. That's what the e-learning needs to be. So we have the spectrum. There's the spectrum of things we have to play with in our industry, right? How does a designer in the tricky side of life start to move the discussion?
So I think we all have encountered this, whether it is an organization that is a bit more structured and this is what it is, or you're new to an organization and you've been come to ask and make a lot of change, and so you haven't yet proved, your ideas maybe are good. And so I think personally, and this isn't always possible, I always try to establish a relationship outside of the project. So if you can, obviously in huge organizations, this isn't always possible. If you have to come in and start diving into work, it's not always possible. But I think even if you can't establish a relationship, what I tend to do is just what are the issues you're seeing? What is working now? What is not working? What would you like to change? So take off any content. Just tell me what's not working. And then I think with content questions or, materials, if you have an idea, because and this goes with face-to-face training as well, I need a training to fix it. Do you though? So I try to dive in, well, what is it you're trying to achieve? The golden question, but also really try to figure out what the root cause is. Is it actually skills, knowledge, motivation, process? Because if it's a process thing, I can make all the e-learnings you want, but if, a system is broken in the middle, it won't matter. And so I think, and I talk through that all to better understand, but I come at it from a very inquisitive curiosity place, trying to understand. And I think, I tend to get really passionate very quickly. And so I think people know that I want to understand and try to do what's best for their design. I bring in data and experience. And so, especially with certain areas that I've worked in now multiple times, I can really recall in my experience, we saw XYZ happen because of XYZ. And I'm not saying stakeholders don't push back. I'm not saying I haven't had people just continuously shut me down. I have. But I think those are exploratory questions you can kind of start with. I think if they are very much, this is a deck, turn it into an e-learning, and you've figured out, okay, there is an actual problem, there does need to be some kind of training. Again, exploratory. Why do you think this deck is the most, why do you think this would be most effective? Why this information? Who is the audience for this? And then using that, and I think too, being outside of the space as a learning professional, it really helps that because you can give honest feedback. If it's meant for someone in that organization, great, they will understand. But if it's really technical, you can use that as just as a note as somebody who isn't as used to this. I think this gets really, really deep. Like, does everyone need to know this? What are the levels that people need to know? So break it down section by section. Look at the audience. Look at the delivery. Ask them what is it that they absolutely need to know. Anything that doesn't fit. Once you work with them to address the root problem and what they're trying to achieve, it's really easy then to kind of walk back and be like, well, this is something separate. So let's take that out. And again, I'm not saying that it's easy. There are difficult conversations. I'm very stubborn. So I've had to be stubborn. I think leaning on the experience, historical data that you have, if you do have information about modalities with your company or, different things you've run, using that to say, well, we've seen actually videos people really engage highly with that. You can reference even the wider world. So you mentioned about attention span. If someone wants a 20-minute video, you can say, let's reflect on the reality of media now. Probably 20 minutes, you're going to lose them 5 minutes in, if not sooner. And so I think there's so much we can pull from in the digital space because we're in such a digital heavy world. But I think, just coming at it as a partnership and wanting to bring them on the journey with you. But again, I'm not saying that I haven't had people that shut me down and just at the end of the day. And then I think to some extent, if they're refusing to budge, you say, okay, but these are my concerns and the risks. If you're willing to move ahead knowing those, let's do it. And then do a postmortem. See what happens, reflect, was there to engage with, what was the feedback? And then you can use that to say, I hear what you're saying, but this is the results of it.
Interesting. If you're watching, pick up some of that stuff as good practice, but also there's a caveat, right? And it might not always work. That's the caveat.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, you can try your best. You can have the best negotiation skills, but there are some stakeholders that just will not budge, and that's okay. But I think continuing that journey with them, and raising those concerns, so at least that you've done all you can do to kind of set the project up for success.
It's not only stakeholders. Some organizations, their culture doesn't allow that kind of movement. Yeah. Yes. Now, it's interesting stuff. So back to the use of AI, though. So AI in development. AI is, I'm going to slightly shift the crosshairs. Rather than talking about the general purpose tools, the ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, these kinds of tools, to focus on some of the off-the-shelf SaaS, which the learning market has access to. So there is the prevailing paradigm of the likes of Articulate, who have AI functionality, Articulate, Captivate, Elucidate, all of these. And then the avatar tools, the Synthesia, Colossian, Our1, HeyGen, the cartoon tools, Powtoons, and Beyond, and all of these. They're all putting in some kind of AI functionality now. But that's on the production side. So that's how do you make a finished piece of media that might support some kind of narrative. In the ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude side of things, you could be building scenarios, narratives, etc. The ideal scenario is to have workflows that link all of these tools together and do it in a way that's helpful. But all of these things are potentially new things. If you're watching this, you might not know anything that I've just said. This might all have just been gibberish for the last couple of minutes. But thinking about all of that, we have a vast and sprawling tool set in front of us. How do we start to approach the problems of design with the tools that we have available to us today? Where would you start?
Well, I think it's understanding what, and I actually just raised this question, how is, when you're thinking about your larger learning strategy and your talent development strategy, what role is technology going to play? How do you want it to work? How do you want to use it? What does it look like? And then deciding what tools do you need to facilitate that. Because realistically, no company, well, and if you are a company that has this, well done, but most don't have a budget to be buying all of those tools you just mentioned. Obviously, there's repeats in some of them, but the tech stack for a learning team generally isn't insanely robust. So it's really picking out the tools that will drive the most impact. And I think that's understanding, what is digital learning at your company, to which I would say a lot of companies hone in on one modality for digital learning, whereas I think it's any tool or technology that enables and empowers learning. So I think having at least a couple of different tools that support different types of learning are important. I think there's also different levels. So there's the content creation type tools, things like Articulate, Beyond, but then there's also now tools that support the learning, but are not content creation. So for example, platforms that allow scenario-based applications. So, you're a manager, the prompt is to give feedback and, they map out a persona and you have to chat with them and give them feedback. And then the tool gives you feedback on your feedback. And so that's kind of a completely different area because it's not content creation at all. And so I think understanding what your budget is, what is it you're trying to do, to your point about, moment in time learning. So for example, e-learning creation tools, video creation tools are moment in time learning. So what does that look like? Is that something you want to invest in? Compliance, we've always created it in-house. So you would want a tool like Articulate or something like that. And I think in regards to the AI functionalities within all of these tools, something my husband always says that is so true is that what we're seeing now is the worst it will ever be. And it's already pretty good. But I think also it's not quite there yet. I know I've used Beyond and tools like that where you kind of out of curiosity, and they're in beta testing, and to see if I just give them my script, what does it look like? And there are limitations around it. And so I think, again, though, it's really good if you have a small team or you have a team that doesn't have a digital designer who has experience with that. So I think it's also looking at the skill set within your team. But I think at the end of the day, it's how do you want to use digital learning? What is digital learning in the bigger ecosystem? So for example, if you are a face-to-face first company, you wouldn't invest in all of these tools. If that's your preference, you might invest in one or two of them. But I think really, looking at your big areas of focus, how you want to deliver learning. Also, again, using the wants of your people. So, using the modalities based on that. I think also with like learning systems, there's a lot of AI functionality in those as well, is something we're exploring. And so figuring AI is embedded into everything, but I think it's really understanding at the end of the day, what role do you want technology to play and what do you want that to look like? And with your budget beyond content creation, are you able to explore those opportunities with some of those more application-based AI tools, which are very, very cool.
And there's a slight difference there between a practitioner view, vendor view, a strategist view, because and a platform view as well, right? All of these things are going to be slightly different because for me, learning departments that are looking at tool acquisition. And you mentioned the budget aspect. It's difficult to be able to afford all of these tools. I run a business. I have my own business. I spend money on tools that are relevant for my business. It's not. A lot of these things are pretty cheap. They're only expensive if you follow market lock-in. So what's the price of an Articulate license right now?
It's like 1,200, 1,500.
Yeah, like why the
per
hell would
user.
anybody buy that? That's comparable to getting ChatGPT licenses for your entire team, right? What is the value add of that kind of license? And that's an industry lock-in, right? The value add is legacy supplier that's dominant in a particular market that produces a particular type of output format, and that's why people buy it, right?
But I think I hear the point around, oh, that's a ChatGPT license for your whole team. But also, ChatGPT, well, yes, can do some visuals. You can't just teach with visuals. You are getting a lot more with the, different functionalities. So Articulate obviously has the whole 360. So there's video, there's recording, there's storyline, there's Rise. They have a whole bunch of courses that are already pre-created. There's AI functionality now. And so I think, yes,
Is that
you
GPT
could get
functionality?
but I think, people, again, you're looking at different modalities of learning as well. So ChatGPT, great for in the flow learning or information, as you said, in the flow information gathering. But if you want to I think also ChatGPT, if we're using that to teach our people, that's putting a lot of assumption that they know how to use it well. Because even with scenario-based application opportunity, I'd argue, oh, that's what something can be done in e-learning. But then I say, oh, well, I've done that with ChatGPT. But it's because as a learning professional, I know what to prompt it. I know what to challenge it. So how do the general population, a company won't necessarily have those kind of prompts to know what kind of scenario-based questions to ask, to really get them or to ask for the feedback on them. And so I think you have to be careful how much you are relying on this tool, and I guess how much belief you have in your people to be able to know how to navigate it in the best way possible. Right? If you know what you're doing and you are really strong, it's an amazing tool. But there's so much to learn. It's still a new tool. And I think you just have to be aware that you can't assume that people are AI literate.
I don't buy that at all. What we're saying is AI literacy is a thing that companies need to deal with, and we know that they do. There's a EU AI Act that there is an imperative to some degree. We know it's going to be valuable in the future, so companies are looking at this as a value creator, as part of a competitive advantage. And we are saying that we need to design things and Articulate because we as learning designers know better than they do how to create a scenario. That doesn't wash with me. Go on, say it again.
No. No, so what was happening, I was arguing with my own self as I was talking. So no, Articulate is not needed in the skills of our people are we putting. Just because it is a new tool, we can't assume that everyone knows how to use it in its fullest extent. Articulate, though, is more than just scenario-based opportunities. It allows you to combine a variety of modalities. It can have video, it can have interactions, it can have branching opportunities, it can connect to other resources. There's reading, there's drag and drops. There's all kind of functionality within it. Also for smaller teams, it has that content that's already pre-created. I look at the Rise functionality. It allows you to streamline content creation very quickly while still making it engaging and still can make it
It's still static content creation, though. That's my point. And my point is that at that price point, considering, right, you could go ChatGPT Pro for twice the price of an Articulate license annually, and you would get Sora in there. You would get Operator. You'd be able to write code. You could have a conversational partner. You could add documents. In Document Store, you could sort out your projects. And I'm not selling ChatGPT. I'm just saying the price point is unjustified for the thing that it is. And there's a protectionism idea around learning departments saying that only they know best about how people should learn. Everybody knows how to learn. That's my point.
No, I'm not saying that L&D teams only know best. I think it's just as we venture out into this next phase with more on-demand information. Yeah, just to clarify, I do not think we know best, but I do think we need to, just with any way we deliver learning, there needs to be a balance of we need to let people go out and try, but also we need to guide them. And that's not just L&D, that's general kind of change with any kind of area. But I think with AI moving so quickly, us being in such a technical and digital world, I think there could be an assumption for everybody that people maybe are more familiar with different tools than they are, because we just are also used to being bombarded and hearing about all of these things. So we're, as an organization or as an industry, we say, oh yeah, everyone knows how to use AI. And so I think we just need to be, everybody needs to be very careful with how much we're assuming people know. And I think if, as learning professionals, if we are going to move in the direction of using chatbots to be opportunities for learning and information with things like scenario-based, giving context around the best ways to set up prompts and to ask the right questions and things like that. You can't assume anyone is coming into the classroom and they all know the exact same thing.
Yeah. Okay, this is really interesting. I'm gonna end on a question that I ask everybody. That is the future of learning, because this is a learning conversation, the future of learning, enabled with AI, enabled with all the things that we talked about for the last hour. Is it utopia or dystopia?
I think that's up to us. I feel like there is a world of possibilities and potential and so many benefits, but also I look at some of the areas that are being focused on and I'm like, why? Why are we putting our energy there? That seems like a really bad idea. And so I think this is where the heart of L&D and people teams come in, is help champion all the positives and, see the potential and work together to evolve and make it what it could be in a positive way. I think people teams have so much heart and care, and they just want to do right by the people they work with and, at their organizations. And so if they take that care and consideration and that, they're full of curiosity and passion. And if you put that into how you're using AI and that creativity, though it's endless of what you could do in a positive way. And I think that's the biggest thing, is be curious and be creative. Think about how it's a tool to help you, not to take away. So I do think there is a world of possibility, positive possibility, but we do have to be careful. That's what I'd say.
Very good. I like it. You avoided the question. No, I'm kidding. You didn't. You gave me an answer. It's exciting. It's exciting. There is a lot of possibility out there. I think for me, my reflection is I've probably got 20 years on you in terms of career. So I would say I've met exciting, driven people who really care and want to make an impact. I've met lots of people who were basically dead inside and wanted to suck the value out of everything, and everybody in between.
Yeah.
Because this is the rich tapestry of the workplace in which we all endure. So, yeah, slightly different perspectives. But Megan, it has been an absolute pleasure. I've looked forward to this before we did it. We've had many conversations in the past, of course, and I think this back and forth today around some of these potentially contentious issues was amazing. It was worth every minute that we put into it. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're watching this on Spotify, don't forget to follow the channel. Find us on LinkedIn, find us on Instagram, and see you next time.